Hello, Mark Sermon here, Executive Director at Mozilla, and I want to give you an update on our Mozilla Learning Strategy process. But before that, I just want you to imagine 5 years into the future, to 2020. And imagine that Mozilla's fellows and our leaders and our educators who we work with are the most sought after talent in tech, the most sought after talent on the web as people who are shaping the future. I want you to imagine a time where Mozilla is as well known as it is for Firefox today for helping new smartphone users, helping everyone on the web understand the basics of what the web is, what the internet is, and what it can unlock in their lives. That's something we do at a huge scale, and that people notice, and that we're shifting the bar on universal web literacy. And finally, I want you to imagine that the web literacy agenda that Mozilla has taken up, the idea that everyone should be able to read, write, and participate on the web, that's something that governments and others around the world have joined us on, and we're really moving the bar. That those governments are seeing web literacy as important as reading, writing, and math as today, that they see it as a core part of their agenda. Imagine that that's something that has happened within 5 years. All those things I think are possible and necessary, and that's what the Mozilla Learning Strategy, which you may have heard of as Mozilla Academy, is all about. How do we find the focus to make those things happen in the world? And the context of this is the Mozilla Foundation team, which I lead, set out to do a more comprehensive, ambitious learning strategy in 2016, for 2016 and beyond, for the next 3 to 5 years. That's a goal we committed to for 2015. What does that mean translated? It means that the Mozilla Foundation teams and programs find a clear single focus. And we look at Mozilla Foundation, the next generation. And other parts of Mozilla as well will contribute to this agenda, but we're looking at where can the Mozilla Foundation teams focus their effort in the next few years. And some assumptions behind that work are that at the top line, the idea that the web is a public resource owned by all of us is a core part of the mission of Mozilla, and everything we do from product education focuses there. That's the baseline. But from there, the assumptions we have are that universal web literacy is the North Star of Mozilla Foundation's work. It is where we will focus our efforts, that we're going to focus on emerging leaders and independently minded people around the world as the people who we want to help gain more web skill, but also who can help us carry this cause forward. And that a kind of service ethic, a teach it forward or pay it forward ethic, will be the fuel for how we succeed at this, will be the way that we get people involved to share what they know. And that's something that when you add it all up around the world, that teach it forward ethic can actually build universal web literacy and a web literate planet. So questions we want to answer by the time we get through the strategy process, which is later this year, and some questions we still have at this moment, although we do have some clear core elements of the strategy. Some questions we still have at this moment are the kind of impact we want to have, how this web literacy idea ties everything together, and how leadership and advocacy, which I'll talk about in more detail, connect to each other and drive this bigger web literacy agenda. So we're going to get to what is the strategy kind of thinking right now, and to tee up those questions for the next few months by the end of this. But first, let's step back and say, why web literacy? And the key piece is almost all of us will be online within 10 years. We'll have 5 billion people on the planet online. It's a normal part of everybody's life. It's just going to shape how the economy and people's lives and democracy work out. So as goes the internet, so will go humanity as we go forward. And at the same time as there's that growth, right now we're finding that people actually know less about what the internet is and what they can do with it. There's more empowerment in a sense. More people are getting connected, but do they know what they can do? And just the one story, but it illustrates many other things that came out in research in the last 6 months. This idea that millions of Facebook users have no idea that they're even on the internet. They don't know the internet exists. And as more and more people get connected, it doesn't mean that they know more about what's possible. Again, as this suggests, they know less. The same goes with things like internet.org, where people get free internet access and access to 10 websites. Imagine if that's all of the internet you had. But worse, imagine if that is all of the internet you could imagine. That's where we're going. And so And it's where we're going unless we do something, which I propose that we do. And so if you look at the web right now, you can think about it as a scale of people who don't know very much and at this point are either not connected or online, but don't really know what's possible. And if very few people have a lot of know-how on the right end of our curve, and really get to shape what the internet means in their lives, or in many cases shape where the internet goes. So we have a real divide between knowledge and power in some ways. And of course, this curve will shift naturally, whether we do anything or not over the next few years. More people will come online, and they'll know something about the web. But I think if current trends continue, most will remain really consumers of what is offered on the internet with very little know-how. And that's not the internet I want, and it's not, I think, the internet that is going to unlock the potential that we have all hoped for in it. So, what we want to do as Mozilla is really shift that curve, shift it to the right, where everyone can read, write, and participate. Where as people get connected, they are web literate, they know what is possible. And I think that's both good for people, but it's good for the web, because people will expect the internet to be able to do all the things we hope it can do, or that it does do today. Let us express ourselves, let us put an idea out there. And I think it's good for society, for the economy, for democracy. So this is the reason we see our goal as Mozilla, in addition to producing great open source products, as universal web literacy, which fuels the idea that everyone is empowered by opportunity, by technology, and by know-how. So universal web literacy is really where we want to focus the Mozilla Foundation work. And as I said, the core assumptions that flows into are universal web literacy is tied to the idea that the internet is a public resource owned by all of us, and that we're going to work with this cadre of leaders and independently minded people around the world to teach it forward, to pay it forward, to build a web literate society into the future. So the challenge that we had in terms of why are we doing this strategy process is that the good news, we already have many programs focused on web literacy as Mozilla. Both Mozilla Foundation and Mozilla Corporation, our product group. The challenge is these initiatives are fragmented and operate in many different ways. And that means it's hard to have the kind of impact we want to have without getting them focused, without choosing what's the best way to organize and channel our resources. And of course, this came out of a good thing, as we really started about 5 years ago to say, what can Mozilla Foundation do, which is the parent organization of our product group that makes Firefox. It's a nonprofit. That's the organization that my teams work under. And we've grown a lot in the last 5 years trying to figure out what should Mozilla Foundation do into education, into fellowships, into all kinds of community building. And as we've grown, most of that growth is in philanthropic dollars. We've created great programs. And you can see these programs on this kind of similar version of the curve from before. Some are focused on large-scale advocacy or on software like WebMaker, which is around teaching people about web literacy or helping them learn in an ambient kind of way. Or fellowships and other things which really deeply engage with leaders. We've become good at all of these things. I'm really proud of these programs. But they are there's different operating models in each of them. They are fragmented in our efforts. Sometimes people feel really stretched thin, even though we've got 80 people focused on roughly a similar agenda. So, both in terms of public understanding of what we're doing and in terms of focused resources, we really need to take this, build on it, focus it. That's what this strategy process is about. So, in order to get to that, we've done a bunch of analysis and thinking, looking at our programs that we have, our assets, and the field. And we've come to some insights as a part of that. One is that the digital skills space is crowded, especially in that center of the field where we're really directly teaching people. And many of the people who it's crowded with are allies. We should be supporting them. So maybe sounds obvious, but that was one thing that's really clear to us as we were thinking about this. Number two, our biggest strength that we've developed in the last 5 years, in some ways organically and in slightly different models, is in what I call developing open source leaders, people who share our cause and are using an open source approach to change the world. And even the things that we may have thought of as being in the middle of the curve, Hive and Mozilla Clubs, when you look at them, are focused on developing the leaders, the educators, who do that web literacy work with us. That's actually the kind of professional development, leadership development piece of those things is actually the strength of those programs. So, maybe we should think of them all as one thing. Think of them all as leadership development that connects us to networks, that fuels the rest of the curve, the rest of a movement for the open web and for web literacy. So that's another insight. And the third is really, again, maybe it was obvious, but as we speak loudly with a clear voice on issues like privacy, net neutrality, zero rating, web literacy, people like that and respond well. And people learn along the way. So when you think about net neutrality, more Firefox users today are able to put together a sentence on what it is and explain it to their friends in the millions because we used Firefox to run a campaign on net neutrality. When we do advocacy, we also do web literacy, we also do public education, and it can be high impact at scale. So that's another insight. In addition to that kind of reflection, we looked at a basic kind of SWOT analysis of where we are with our programs. And it's clear in that we have momentum and strength around web literacy, around advocacy, around leadership development. And we can build that into an opportunity to be louder on the advocacy side. Combine leadership development, combined advocacy really to push our agenda. So that part of the SWOT analysis really informed our strategy, as you'll see. On the weakness side, there is this issue of fragmentation. There is an issue of other organizations as a threat coming in and taking this agenda but with different values. I guess the real threat, which I don't have there on the screen and really should, is that people don't know what the web can do for them. And that sort of the 10 website internet.org vision of the world wins, and people can't imagine the web that we can imagine today. That's the real threat, and that's what we're up against. So what's the strategy we want to take to address that? And, the idea that we've got, based on what we've done so far, is to push ourselves to the two ends of the curve and put our resources there. To focus on shifting thinking with this audience of independents and creatives, that's about kind of mass understanding and web literacy at a large scale, and build on our strength of developing leaders with educators, developers, activists, volunteers. And concretely, that means more energy and more investment in advocacy, thought leadership, user education, and maybe also in product driving web literacy, as well as integrating our clubs, our hives, our fellowship programs into a single learning and leadership development program, and maybe also tying that into things like MDN and REMO. So 2 big strategies: shift thinking, develop leaders, builds on what we've already got, but a focused operating model, a focused set of goals. And then, of course, partners still being a key part of that strategy. It always has been that we are trying to fuel partners on the ground and build something bigger, build a big tent. So that is key to it. So if we go with that strategy and the vision is universal web literacy, how do we know if we're moving the ball? One is going to be to set some benchmarks or baseline kind of targets, I guess is a better way to put it, on the scale we want to get. So we'll work on that over the next couple months. But we're talking about millions of relationships around advocacy and also just like getting a lot of people involved. We're talking about the number of leaders we can build and the ripple effects they can have and the number of partners we can have. And that's a way to see if we're growing. In terms of are we moving the bar, we're going to need to do things like track public opinion and changes in behavior, looking at whether the network we build globally is influential, seeing whether the ripple effects and the contributions of the leaders we work with actually move the ball on web literacy. So those are the kind of things we're going to have to figure out how to measure as impact as we go forward. But ultimately, those are the things we want to do. We want to shift thinking, we want to develop leaders, and we want to build a global network of partners who help us do that to drive universal web literacy. And as we go into 2016, it's going to mean we're going to need to make some concrete changes to what we're doing. We need to build a bigger advocacy team and platform. We need to look at how software and product are in service of that, and maybe not have MoFo as focused on some idea that we can have mass scale software in the hundreds of millions of users. We lean on the Firefox product group for that piece of what Mozilla does, and then integrate those programs of clubs, Hive, and fellows, and shift our funding model to something that's more diverse and more independent, where we continue to work with grant makers who share our agenda, but also bring in other kinds of gifts to grow what we're doing. And of course, in that, we will have to answer those questions I outlined at the beginning of the day, or the beginning of this slide deck, which is the kind of impact, the way web literacy ties our stuff together, and in particular, can this leadership and advocacy piece really fuel each other to build, kind of an open source virtuous circle. So that's what we'll be doing over the course of, say, August to October, really digging in and answering those questions and going to the next level of detail in the strategy. You'll see teams and community members across Mozilla working on that. Follow these blogs. And I would say get involved. I am really excited that we want to make this a key focus of what Mozilla is doing, tackling universal web literacy. We already have the seeds of it. The agenda needs to be much bigger, much more ambitious, and we need to be clear on the impact we're trying to have. And I feel we're close to figuring that out. So stay tuned and get involved. Thanks very much.